Vacancy days and time on market kill yield. How responsive management wins. Hi everyone and welcome to Queensland Business Stories, brought to you by connectedplatforms.com.au. IT done right, done better. Today we welcome Richard Chai, who leads CPC Properties with a practical client-side view on what Brisbane investors and owners actually need from a property partner. He's relationship-driven, he's had an emphasis on speed and response and clear communication. It's helped in a whole range of areas. Richard's edge is this: acts quickly, sets accurate expectations and keeps owners informed. Look, welcome today, Richard. Thank you for joining us. I think this is going to be an excellent conversation. How are you going?
Good. Thanks for having me, Chris.
It's great to have you here. Now, you have this idea that really the way to achieve success in probably any business really, but specifically looking at real estate, is you just need to be fast. You just need to have good communication. You need to be there for your customers. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, definitely, Chris. Especially for real estate side of things, communication is the key for everything. I've definitely come across situation before where a real estate agent or a property manager has done a lot of work, but while doing that work, there's no communication with the clients, and then the outcome is not great, especially the feeling of the client. They don't know what's going on. They're not being keeping posted. So in my business, doing the actual work the communication is also as important as doing the actual work. So no matter what you're doing, you got to let people know, keep people informed, because most of the time we don't make any decisions as agents. We just, help the clients to make the informative decision. So the communication and the responding time is really, really important in that matter.
Do you notice currently, because obviously there's a lot going on in the world, there's a lot going on in markets, all of this filters down to your industry in particular. When you think about Brisbane, what are people optimizing for right now when you're having those conversations? Are they thinking about cost? Are they thinking about time on market? What are they thinking about, and what trade-offs are you having to make in that communication when you're having it with clients?
Every person's situation is different. So we definitely have investors or sellers, they are emphasizing on different aspects. Like if you're having a couple that divorcing, they may be looking at times on market. They want to settle this as soon as possible. But I've also worked with downsizers. The time is not a real hurry. They want to get the right price to plug their retirement. So depends on different clients. They are looking for different stuff. But for most of the investors getting into the market, I think the yield is definitely number one. A lot of people are looking at. It's just because the affordability is not there anymore. Getting a good rental yield is for a lot of people that's very important.
And is that changing? Like, have you noticed a difference in that more recently? Because everyone is aware that we have a cost of living crisis underway. We have a housing affordability crisis underway. Is that playing into this discussion?
Yeah, definitely. If you look at the rental market, like affordability is a real thing. We're talking about $20 per week rent can make a big difference. I mean, we have properties, if you drop the price by $20, the amount of the inquiries triples, quadruples, and you can tell the difference straight away. And people all know at the moment the rental market in Brisbane is very, very competitive. So that $20 a week really make a big difference.
And that's crazy to think that such a small price difference has a huge impact on how many people are even applying for that property. Do you find you have a lot of conversations with investors around that, like trying to pick that price point, because that also might not be a good thing necessarily. You might be getting swamped. How do you price that? How do you figure out what the optimal level is for an owner?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We always say my personal preference is to have a balance point between the best rental yield and the quality of the tenants. So sometimes a property can get really, really top dollar on the market, but the quality of the tenants is not there, if you know what I mean. So to not to be offensive to anyone, but if a property is over the market rent for not much, just for $30 a week, you're losing the majority of the market. Only people who's applying for that rental property is the people who cannot get in a market rent property. So then that quality of the tenants drops dramatically for that $30 a week extra. So that's the question you got to ask yourself, whether you want a good quality of tenants for that $30 less a week, or you want maximize that $30 a week, but sacrifice on the quality of the tenants.
Well, we'll see that just seems so, and this is where it's so important to speak to an expert in that area, because that seems back to front to me. I would have assumed, by raising it $30 a week, you're going to get better quality tenants because they're prepared to pay that extra. But as you've just highlighted, it's got nothing to do with the quality. Often people will be paying the extra because they couldn't get a property for that cheaper price.
Yeah. Well, basically, we found when the tenants are searching for the properties now, the data are very transparent. If you go on realestate.com and domain, you would find similar properties in the surrounding area. So if everyone is renting, let's say, for $600 per week, and you are renting for $630 a week, people would generally go for the cheaper one first to apply.
Right.
And then that $600 property will have a much larger tenants pool to choose from. So that's why you normally get better quality tenants for a good market rate.
And that makes perfect sense. It's just so interesting how my brain just went the other way and assumed it was something else. And that's where you learn. This is why you need to speak to the experts, right? I also was curious because we've had a lot of government changes, regulation changes, whether it's things like the insurance standards on things, whether it's things like compliance for what you can and can't do if you're renting, or people renting out their properties. Also, banking, right? Like we've had different changing dynamics with a changing market on what people are prepared to lend, what they require. Can you talk to us a little bit about how, for your business and your industry generally, regulation has changed recently, and what some of those impacts are that you've experienced?
Yeah, so on the rental and sale side, there's both changes on both sides. And in regards to rental, we had a rental reform late last year, and the biggest change was the break-lease regulation changes. So if you are a tenant signed a 12-month lease before that rental reform, if you break lease in the middle, you are liable for the rent payment until the agency finds the next renter or your lease agreement finish, whichever sooner. So for example, if you break your lease, it takes the agent 4 weeks to find another tenant, you are liable for that 4 weeks rent previously. But now the changes as the maximum amount is 4 weeks rent, and it breaks down into how far away you are into your lease agreement. So they break into 4 segments. If you are in the first 25% of your lease agreement, the maximum amount of penalty you pay is 4 weeks. If you are the 25% to 50% of your lease, you only pay 3 weeks as a maximum. If you are the third quarter of the lease, 2 weeks rent. If you're the last quarter of the lease, you only pay 1 week rent when you break the lease. So we do say the breaking lease numbers increases at the last quarter of the lease agreement. So that's why coming back to the responsive time and the communication with the clients is very important. So it just put more pressure on the landlords because the compensation they receive is capped at a certain amount. And the agency and the landlord got got to act on it really, really quickly to minimize the loss of the break-lease. For the sales side of things, like you mentioned before, the banking is coming into like the lending criteria and the interest rate has changed. Uh, so we are saying the borrowing capacity has been impacted by that, especially the upper end of the market. Not a lot of people coming back to the affordability. So that market is a lot smaller compared to the medium range properties. And that lending policy, we've had inquiries before for $1.7 million apartment. Like people really like that apartment, but when after they speak to their broker, the borrowing capacity is capped at 1.5, so they couldn't go for that property. So that is happening a bit more compared to last year, the year before.
And something that's been playing in my mind, and it's sort of a bit of a segue, I want to talk about technology, but something that has been playing on my mind is the impact that AI might have if it destroys some of those middle class white collar jobs. And if, in terms of lending capacity, a lot of the people who could afford those more expensive apartments or more expensive properties were those people in those jobs. Do you imagine, I mean, you probably haven't seen it yet, but I'm wondering if down the track lending standards tightened even further depending on what job you had, for example, because they'd be going, well, do you have a job? I mean, a tradie, you might be right for a while because there's not really impacting your job there. But if you're running digital marketing, for example, that your whole skill set is creating images and doing things that can be replicated by AI, can you imagine a scenario where that starts impacting lending standards?
Oh, I haven't really thought about this before, but at the moment, I think banks' criteria where they look at your pay slips, they look at your credit history and all of that, haven't been looking at the category of the jobs as yet. To me, it's probably really hard to justify if they make that as a policy because I think there's still a lot of uncertainty of what AI can do. If you're just ruling out a whole category of people, I don't think it's a fair policy to be made. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think it'll be a bit of a grey. I wonder if it'll be a bit of a grey area in that time in the middle where the lending standards just, it could be problematic for banks because they go, well, they might see defaults starting to rise if there's certain people whose jobs are not being replaced. I don't know, it's a tricky one. But more generally on technology, how do you approach, whether it's AI in your business or technology generally? I mean, certainly there have been a lot of developments that would have impacted your business, your clients, your approach. So can you talk to us a little bit about the technology angle and how that impacts you?
Yeah, sure. It certainly helped small business. In my business, it certainly improved efficiency. We use a software called Property Me in property management side of things, and I can tell the Property Me software is integrating more and more automation into the software. And with that automation, it definitely helps with the productivity and efficiency of our business. On the sales side of things, we're using CRM systems, and I can see all of those major players are starting to integrate AI into their software. And that's definitely helped with the productivity and efficiency. So definitely helped the business a lot, I think, from a technology point of view.
Yeah, I can imagine you kind of can't escape it really if you're in that industry when some of those tools are just so powerful, and to not have them, it creates its own set of problems, I imagine.
Yeah. I think there's too many technologies out there. It's it's almost so last year we are at a point we just got too many apps and softwares. We have to cut back some overlapping because people are juggling different platforms and different apps. So I think to a point that's actually reducing the productivity, if anything. And to keep it simple and straightforward, I think it's better. And that's what we are going at the moment.
And I love that, really. You're absolutely right. You've got to almost do an audit because you can go backwards. They're not increasing productivity if you've got to use 50 different apps to do something that could be done in one. That makes a lot of sense to me. But look,
Yeah.
you have your finger on the pulse. You're right there dealing with selling a property in Brisbane. What are investors looking at across Brisbane right now, particularly probably some of the higher end properties that you were talking about? Are there some themes that are emerging that you're noticing in terms of investor behaviour across that sort of area of Brisbane?
Yeah, certainly. I think a lot of investors start to offloading the upper market properties. And this is what we're seeing. One of my friends, he just sold riverfront, beautiful house in Gold Coast, and he wants to reinvest into more affordable properties, maybe using that capital to buy two affordable properties rather than keeping that luxury investment property. It's just the rental yield for that upper end is not there to support the investment. And he did say he thinks his projection is the upper market has become tougher. So that's happening a bit in the buy and sell market. And we do see this in the rental market as well. If you have a rental property generating $1,100 a week, when you are changing tenancy, it's really hard to find people. I wouldn't say really hard. It's a lot harder compared to a $600 property. So let's say if we put a one-bedroom unit, $600 on the market, we can rent it within 1 week, easy. We probably have 20, 30 people come to the inspection. But if you have a 3-bedroom apartment renting for $500 a week, then that becomes a lot harder to rent.
Well, and I imagine because you've got to have people who can firstly afford that, but also that aren't looking to buy themselves in that environment. It can become quite tricky with that higher end where you probably have had more people who are prepared to spend that previously.
Yeah,
I imagine
sure.
Yeah. I want to come back to what we sort of started with. Your responsiveness. It is very important. It's a driving force for you, I know. So, can you give us an example where that's really turned something that would have been potentially problematic or a bit of a disaster into a win, where just being the human aspect of this, because it's interesting we talk about the technology, but really a lot of what I'm finding from talking to different business people is it needs to keep coming back to this human aspect. That's where the real success is. So I'd love to hear a story from you of something that has been really turned around by you being that responsive, good communicator that you've been focusing on for your business.
Yeah, great question. I have a lot of different stories about this. But if we're talking about investor point of view, the responsiveness is not only our part. Like I said before, we are not making any decisions. Sometimes we rely on the landlords to make a decision. Also, the response time from the landlord can become very important too. Let's say, normally we do open inspections for rental and sales on the weekend, on Saturdays, most of the time. And let's say a prospective tenant submit a rental application. Now, because of how competitive the rental market is, the quicker you respond to the prospective tenants, the more chance you can secure a good tenant. So our observation is most of the time the tenants are not just applying for one property, they're applying for multiple properties at the same time. And the sooner you go back to them, the better chance you can secure them. So that's why sometimes we even process applications on Saturday afternoon. We get everything summarized to the landlord so that they can make an informed decision on Sunday, and Monday we already issued the lease agreement. So to get in front of people quicker, it really makes it easier for people to make a decision. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Look, you're dealing with investors all the time. I'd love to know some mistakes that they commonly make. Probably what's the most common mistake that you find investors are making, or maybe not even most common, but most interesting mistake. What's something you should be thinking about if you're an investor and it's costing them a lot of money to not know this little bit of information that we could gain from you today?
Yeah, very good question. I think the most important or the most expensive mistake is buying in the wrong structure, wrong entity. So I've known someone who bought their primary residence, not an investor, but bought their primary residence under the company name. And we all know over the last 5 years, Brisbane's market has gone crazy. So that property has gone up a lot in value. If he was holding it into his personal name because it's his primary residence, there's no capital gain tax. But because it's in the company name, by the time he sells it, it's probably going to be $300,000 capital gain tax to pay. So that's probably the most expensive mistake I've seen. One of them.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one because absolutely, and I've known in other business contexts as well, not just speaking about property, but it really does matter that you've got the assets and the income generating assets in the right location, because sort of the inverse of that would be for people who have a lot of income generating assets that are sitting in their personal name and they're paying all that tax on it, where if they'd set it up properly in a company, it would have been a better place to have it. Yeah. Do you deal with or do you recommend to people that they really do need to get some form of advice when they're making some of these bigger decisions? How do you approach that with people, particularly new investors or buyers in the market that really don't know what they're doing? What's the first step there?
Yeah, I think definitely talk to professionals, accountants, financial planners to get the structure right in the beginning. It definitely works well. And every person's situation is different. Depends on your goal and your plan. It could be a different structure according to the goal and the plan. If you're just looking at buying your primary residence, it's not that hard to figure out what entity you use. But if you really want to build a big portfolio, then it becomes a bit more technical to get the structure right. And depends on where you are. If you're just starting, maybe personal name is the easy option to go first. But if you already have a portfolio, then companies come into play, trusts come into play. And what's your plan as well? You want to hold it for 20 years? You want to maybe hold it for 5 years? It all changes the structure.
Yeah, you can't just necessarily impulse buy these things if you want the best outcome. As you said, depending on whether it's a short term, whether it's a long term, there's lots in that for people to consider. Last question to sort of wrap this up. I'd love to know your perspective on what is likely to matter most in Brisbane. So when we talk about the next 12 months, or maybe even longer than that, the next few years, what are people underestimating today? And that might be in two angles. It might be in the rental angle that you talk about, but probably more so the investors and the property ownership angle. What are your thoughts on what's going to matter most in Brisbane over that next sort of forward period?
I think the key word for me is uncertainty in the market. If anyone tells me they know what's going to happen 12 months later, I probably wouldn't believe them.
I probably wouldn't believe if they knew what was going to happen in 24 hours at the moment. It's so volatile.
That's it. So I think the uncertainty is definitely out there. But from the underlying market point of view, I always look at demand and supply that drives the price. So at the moment, I think the biggest challenge is to supply the market. We have very big challenge of delivering new housing into the market. Developing new apartments has become extremely challenging than before. I've known a developer, he told me a story before. They look at a development site, even they can get that block of land for free. They couldn't deliver this project because the price they can sell compared to the construction price, they just don't make any money. And the land is very expensive too. And so we still have this shortage of supply. I don't know how we can address that in the short term. And people in the construction industry are telling me, we have a shortage on labor. And from the property management point of view, we can definitely see that. Like, it's very challenging to get a roofer, plumber, electrician, any trade. They are super busy at the moment. The good quality ones, you gotta book them 2 weeks in advance for a small maintenance job. So that's definitely very challenging. And some people are saying by the end of this year or early next year, when we have the Olympic infrastructure starting, it's going to put more pressure on the housing supply because a lot of trade is going to move into those infrastructure building. So that's going to suck in more trade, more material supply, and it's going to put more pressure on construction prices. So to me, to look at that supply and demand, I think, and also the uncertainty, it's the most important factor.
Yeah, that's really some valuable insight there, because I think for a lot of people, not necessarily putting all the pieces together, you do have to factor in the Olympics and what impact that'll have. It's more complicated than just thinking price go up. It's also understanding the areas and understanding the impact it will have on plumbers and electricians, and there's quite a bit there, I think, for people to unpack, which is very useful, because if they want to speak to people like yourself, they can probably get more information and approach it a little bit more informed than just trying to think it all through themselves, because there's a lot to actually consider there. So look, I think that's going to be very valuable for our listeners. If people want to get in contact with you to continue this discussion and understand a little bit more about their specific circumstances, how would they go about that, Richard?
You mean how they contact me?
Yeah.
You can find my details on my website, cpcproperties.com.au. My phone number. Do you want to disclose my phone number here? Email address?
That's up to you.
Always feel free to give me a call. My number is 0430 914 167. The text message. I get back to people pretty quickly.
Well, that was what I started with. So you might get some people test you out on that to see if you get back to them quickly. Look, thank you for your time on that. It really is valuable, and I know there'll be lots of people interested, because there's always lots of people interested in Brisbane property and what's going on next. But really appreciate your time and effort on that. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Chris.
If you have a Queensland business story that our audience would be interested in, reach out. You can contact us at connectedplatforms.com.au. We'd love to hear from you. Also, we highly value any feedback on what you like or don't, so let us know. Let us know that as well. And if you really love this content, please consider giving us a Google review. It makes a huge difference to our team. We'll be back next week with a brand new Queensland business story. So thanks everyone for watching, and let's stay connected.